Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, from the Metro Toronto Convention Centre in downtown Toronto. Welcome to the Empire Club of Canada. For those of you joining us through either our webcast or our podcast, welcome to the meeting. Today we present Kyle Dubas, General Manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and Bobby Webster, General Manager of the Toronto Raptors, in conversation with Sportsnet's Elliotte Friedman. Today's topic is how big data is changing professional sports. I'm sure everyone is familiar with Moneyball, the book that brought worldwide attention on how sports organizations were using data in new ways. The book and the subsequent movie focused on the analytical approach used by the Oakland Athletics, building on the work of people like Bill James, one of the early pioneers in sabermetrics, for how to assemble a competitive baseball team despite the small budget that Oakland had at the time. It's not that data wasn't available prior to sabermetrics. Baseball has looked at data since the late 1800s. But professional sports innovators, including Oakland, whose manager, Billy Beane, and others, started to make data a significant factor in their decision-making. Not out of some geeky indulgence, but because they saw the advantage in doing so. Fast forward to 2019, big data is all around us in every industry. It drives decision-making. It anticipates consumer behavior. It forecasts world events. And it provides organizations that can take hold of its power with an advantage. There are many corporate leaders in the room today that are responsible for giving their company an edge by leveraging data. But as you can see on the screens, I think it is fair to say that how big data is used in sports organization is not widely understood. And that's why we have an absolutely packed room here today to listen to two data experts in their 30s who have found themselves in the position of leadership at MLSE, one of the world's premier sports organizations. There has been much talk about how our speakers utilize analytics as a tool to help MLSE coaches and frontline staff too, making better decisions on everything from team construction to how players are utilized, to drawing up plays. But Bobby, what it would be interesting to hear today from you and Kyle is how you strike the balance between using traditional tools versus the new ones, the science versus the human. We know that the traditional assessment methods of professional sports, for example, seeing the athlete perform in big games, understanding how they interact with teammates, effectively assessing their value as humans, that these old methods aren't being diminished in importance by the new tools, but instead need to be understood differently in the context of these tools. The Empire Club of Canada is a speakers club that is 14 years older than the Toronto Maple Leafs. In the last 115 years, we've had dozens of sports speeches, the first of which in 1963 by the president of the NHL, and no, it wasn't Gary Bettman at that time, who said at the time that only 180 people worked there and the average salary was $13,215. And the NBA was just a fledgling organization. The business of sports has gotten much more sophisticated since then. And that's why we've had an exciting dialogue ahead to help us better understand it all. So let's go. To conduct today's discussion, we have brought a very seasoned moderator. He has a remarkable career in sports media, spanning more than 20 years, and earning him a reputation as one of the most respected broadcasters in the country. He joined Sportsnet in June 2014 as an insider and analyst for the network's national NHL coverage and Hockey Night in Canada. Unlike our speakers, he may not be in his 30s, but he often has 30 thoughts. 30 Thoughts is the name of his popular online column, and he has a new podcast of the same name with Jeff Merrick. Prior to joining Sportsnet, he was the mainstay of CBC's Hockey Night in Canada, serving as both an in-studio analyst and reporters for 11 seasons. Through his 20-plus years in sports, he has covered numerous major sporting events, including multiple Olympic Games, NHL, MLB, CFL, NBA, and more. Put your hands together for the analyst and insider for the NHL on Sportsnet's and Hockey Night in Canada, Elliotte Friedman. Our next guest has a huge responsibility for managing the day-to-day baseball operations of the Toronto Raptors franchise. He provides his expertise on strategic team building, roster and personnel planning, and player acquisitions. During his time with the Raptors, he has also served as assistant general manager and vice president of basketball management and strategy. Webster came to the Raptors after working for the NBA league office in New York for 7 seasons in the legal department. He brings with him a vast working knowledge of the NBA's collective bargaining agreement, having negotiated the new agreement with the National Basketball Players in 2011. While at the NBA, Webster also advised the front office personnel from all 30 teams on a range of matters including salary cap, luxury tax planning, player contracts, analytics, and trades. Entering his 6th season with the Raptors and second in the driver's seats, please welcome to the general manager of the Toronto Raptors, Bobby Webster. Thanks, Bobby. Finally, he was named the 17th general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs history on May 11, 2018. After originally joining the Leafs as assistant general manager in July of 2014. In his role as the assistant general manager, he held multiple responsibilities, including player personnel, managing the club's player development department and farm system, managing the organizational research and development department, and overseeing the organization's top prospects as general manager of the Maple Leafs AHL affiliates, the Toronto Marlies. He has also served 4 years in a very successful role as the manager of the Toronto Marlies. Before joining the Leafs organization, Dubas served as general manager of the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds in the Ontario Hockey League for 3 seasons. At the time of his hiring by the Greyhounds, the sports management graduate of Brock University became the second youngest general manager in OHL history at the age of 25. In 2015, he was recognized by Forbes magazine as one of the sports industry's brightest young stars in the annual Top 30 Under 30 Sports list. Welcome, the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, Kyle Dubas.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Elliotte, it's all you.
Thank you, Kent. Not only, as Kent mentioned, am I older than both Kyle and Bobby, but I look older too. That's good. Okay, let's start with this. So, talking about data, from 1964 until 1975, the most successful sports team on earth was an NCAA basketball team called the UCLA Bruins. They won 10 out of 12 championships during that time. And everybody wanted to ask their coach, a famous coach by the name of John Wooden, what do you do? Well, first of all, he had great players. He had 2 of the best ever. But they would ask him, what does he look at? What was important to him? And he would always say, when I get the stat sheet, whether it's at halftime or the end of the game, the first thing I check is field goal percentage. I want to know how successfully we're shooting. So you guys both get stats packages during and after games. What are the first things that you guys look at?
I think it's 2 parts. I think, as most people in this room, we have our own kind of proprietary information, which we get our own stat packs on. But I think
Don't worry, we're going to squeeze that out.
Okay, good. So, first you look at the score. Anyways, no, I think if you're a fan and you're watching, I think the things you want to look at, and you kind of have more of a analytical kind of bent on it, is you kind of want to look at how many chances did we have to score. So there's different ways of looking at it. Is if you have turnovers, that means you lost chances. If you have offensive rebounds, that means you gain chances. So you kind of want to look at these type of possession-based stats to figure out, did we have a lot of chances to score? And if we did have chances to score, then the next thing is efficiency, which is field goal percentage.
Kyle?
I think for us, you look at it on the team level, and in general, it depends on what metric you want to use. And one of the major debates in hockey is, there's just the outright proxy for possession, or Corsi. Mm-hmm. And so what percentage of the total shot attempts did your team have? And as analysis has grown deeper and deeper in hockey and improved, now you're starting to be able to measure the quality of every shot and what it can do to your expected goals. So you have a shot from a certain spot on the ice, what's the percentage that goes in? What are the other factors that are going into that? And then how does that impact the expected goals that your team can expect to score in that night? And so there's all these various different things, but until we can get into a level where that sort of stuff is verified at a, I would say, having more of a sample size over time and better verified. And once, the Bobby and the Raptors were one of the first, and the NBA was one of the first to do, formal player tracking in all of their buildings, and we can eliminate some of the subjective analysis from these metrics. I think it has been proven over time that the general percentage of the shot attempts that you have over, game to game, the different things affect them, but you want to see where your team came out on that, and then individually with players how they came out on that metric at the end of the night. So we look at that, and then various different other proprietary things as well.
What percentage of players say, hit me with this, and what percentage of players say, I work on what I work on and I don't even want to know?
I just know from talking to Bobby and from studying basketball that I think that basketball players, if the team isn't providing it, you can jump in and correct me anytime. They're hiring their own people to do it, and I think you're starting to see that more and more in hockey, where before it was, we don't want to know anything, we'll just do what the coach says, and then we'll worry about all the rest of it in the off season. Now in the season, if you don't have a staff that's helping provide the coaches with that to present to the players are going to go and hire their own people to break down their game on a deeper and deeper level, and it's kind of become its own industry within hockey. Mm-hmm. I don't know about it in basketball, but I would assume.
Yeah, I think since I've been for 6 years, a couple of interesting trends is, first you have to educate the players so you're speaking the same language, right? So very simple one is points per game. So how many points has the team scored? We don't really look at points per game anymore. You look at points per 100 possessions, which just tries to normalize how many points you would score over the course of a game, if it was a fast game, a slow game. So now it's when you talk to the players, you're talking to them in the terms that you want to talk to them in. And so that takes, years sometimes. So now at the end of a game, we may have won the game by 2 points, but accounting for pace and accounting for all of the variables, we actually were 10 points better than them. So you kind of want to get the players on, there's an early education process for them, because if you come and hit them with all this proprietary stuff, they have no idea what it means. No different than if your boss came to you or you went to one of your colleagues and introduced some new concept of how to evaluate the team. So a lot of it is just educating the players. And now once we educate them, now it just kind of rolls off your tongue, and you can have more of a daily conversation with them about some of these more, if you want to call them advanced statistics.
Now, just to let you all know, we are going to take a few questions at the end. We're going to leave some time, so if you have something, think about it. Don't be afraid. As both Kyle and Bobby know, only reporters ask dumb questions. So if you've got something, don't hesitate to ask. I'm curious about something you said there. And you can talk about winning a game by 2 points, and you can say, okay, well, the result may have only been this, but we really liked our process. Or we didn't like our process. And that's one thing I get the sense that there's some players, obviously in hockey, which I cover more, they say if they lose a game, a big game or a bad game, they never want to hear our process was good. How do you convince people over long term that maybe a poor result is still okay?
That's really tough, and it's a great question. And even the other way I go with a lot of the times is, if we win by 2, but we kind of felt like we got lucky, or the process wasn't good, let's not kind of gloss over all the things we need to work on just because we won. And that's, at the end of every game when, I walk into Coach Nurse's office and we won or we lost, obviously that's the carrying kind of momentum of the moment. And you kind of want to use these tools to see through that and say, okay, we won, but should we have won? Are we happy with how we played? So it's incredibly tough, and it's something we deal with on a daily basis. And the players, I'll give an example. Last year when we decided we wanted to change our offense, and Kyle and DeMar at the time, we obviously had some success, and initially there was some pushback from them, and one of the tough things to argue with them was, we've won 50 games for however many years in a row. Like, why are we changing this? And so you have to educate them on why you want to educate and on why you want to change. And so, those are tough conversations.
I think that you use the word process, and that's what we use when we're talking internally. We're making decisions when we're having internal debates about the way that we're making decisions or the way that we play. We use that term process. But when you talk to the coaches and the players immediately after, I've noticed more and more. This is my 5th year here, and more every year. Whether we won or lost, there's that initial. There's handshakes if you win, and you have to go through the usual. Be angry if you really played poorly, or pretend you're angry if you played well and lost. And then you get into how you actually played, and you start to shift away from what the result was on the scoreboard into these various different things that we're trying to work on. How we're exiting our own zone with the puck, how we're entering their zone, where we're doing it. Are we on the outside? Are we in the middle? Like different things that we want to do as a team. And you start to break down how you operated in those individual areas, and it gives you the term that they'll use more as players and coaches is how did we play? And I think that's a much easier way to get through to them rather than say, well, what was our process like? And then you can see them start to be like, well, what do you really mean? Because inside your organization, you have so many various different processes you're going through, right? You have your player acquisition, your drafting, trades, contracts, and I think when you're talking about the actual game that's being played, and when players I find now say, how did we play? It's more talking about the actual execution of the various tactics that we're trying to become elite at, and I find there's just more of a conversation revolving around that versus just did we win or lose 4-2. It's more about are we working towards the goals we want to work on before we get to the playoffs.
That's a funny line that Kyle has there about faking being mad. I remember one time the late Brian Murray, who was a great guy to deal with up in Ottawa, we went up there for a game at Hockey Night in Canada, and they had won 5 in a row, and they were just killing people. And he walked by me on his skates to go out to the morning skate. He says, "Please excuse me, I have to go find a reason to be mad at these guys so we can win 6 in a row tonight." I always laugh at those kinds of stories. I'm curious. You guys obviously do a lot of work. How big are I'm convinced that teams lie about how big their staffs are and how much they put into data management, creating data, mining it, sports sciences, all of that stuff. So without lying, how big are your staffs?
Oh, I think I looked the other day, unrelated to this, but I think our staff is 50 people. So if you take 15 players, now we're talking probably 3 to 4 staff per player. So that includes medical staff, coaching staff, analytics staff, scouts. I'm thinking the biggest groups. The biggest groups are the coaching staff, medical staff, and analytics, as far as analyzing what's going on.
And how many people would specifically be hired for analytics?
We probably have 5 full-time analytics people. But I also say this is when we did a head coaching search this summer, and it's a huge part of every hire you make now, right? I mean, whoever you're hiring needs to be facile in understanding whatever analytics are relevant to your industry, right? So when you talk to Nick Nurse about analytics, that's a huge part of why we hired him. That's a huge part of how he assembles his staff. It's a huge part of how, when we're bringing in new people into our medical group, do they understand how we're going to create baselines for the players? How are we going to evaluate their progress if a player is injured? You need to benchmark. So all of these things to me are, if we want to call it big data or analytics. And so that, to me, that part of it goes into every hire we do now.
Okay, Kyle?
Our research and development arm, or analytics arm, has 5 full-time people and then 1 part-time person, and it's only going to continue to grow as our needs and the different things that we're measuring across all aspects of the organization grow. I would say that our actual hockey operation, so our daily analysis of our team and our scouting and drafting, is where they spend most of their time. But then second to that would be our sports science and performance side. And I would say that the amount of data that we're collecting on that side, and it's directly stolen from the Raptors. Alex McKechnie, one of their assistant coaches, after the first season we were with the Leafs, we met with him, Brendan and I, and Larry actually, and Alex kind of helped lead our search for someone to head our department, and that's Dr. Jeremy Bettel. And his department just continues to grow as well. But the amount of data that they collect from the players every single day, it's been a major help and making sure that our players are operating at their peak performance, and that we're doing all we can to sort of take all the data and then guide our practice philosophies and our training philosophies to make sure that we're not overstressing them, and that, you know, for Wednesday night when we play Washington, that they're at their optimal level to have success.
That's one of the things I wanted to ask specifically about. Is everybody here who's a Raptor fan knows the Raptors manage Kawhi Leonard's schedule very carefully. On Wednesday night last week, you had a game against the Suns where initially Kyle Lowry said he wasn't going to play, and then he did. Can the player make that choice, or does the organization normally say, you may want to play, but you're not going tonight?
It's tough. It's case by case. I mean, Kyle's different than Kawhi. You know, Kyle was coming back from a back injury that can resolve completely, and Kawhi has been just dealing with coming back to playing NBA basketball at a super high level consistently. But specifically, I think the interesting part we were just talking about with analytics and maybe someone like Kawhi is when you bring in a player like Kawhi Leonard, you need to have some sort of analytical benchmark intake system, right? So we're going to say, okay, Kawhi's coming into us on July 20th, and how are we going to measure the 5 things that our medical group thinks very important? And then how are we going to keep track of those things over the course of the year so that we know when he's tired, we know that when he's had too much load, we know when he's been working too much, we know when he needs rest. So that's an example of the analytical piece where you have to have people who know what they're tracking, know what they're measuring, and then be able to measure it over the course of the year, and then tell me, tell Masai, tell Coach Nurse in a way that we can understand, you know, when Kawhi needs to sit, when he needs to rest, how is he feeling? A lot of this, as you guys probably know, of a medical intake is just every day, Kawhi, how are you feeling? How do your legs feel? How do your knee feel? And that goes into the decision making as well.
Does he ever tell you, okay, enough, like I want to go tonight?
No, he's very structured. You know, we set out a plan for him, so he knows what to expect. So it doesn't have to be a game by game thing, right?
Okay.
So it's not like, oh, I wake up in the morning, how do I feel? Do I want to play? You know, we've Alex McKechnie, who heads our medical group, sits down with him. This is your schedule for the next 2 weeks, so you know what to expect.
The NBA has a lot of that now. There are teams who rest players. The NHL, last year, every year at the beginning of the season, the league has what they call, called a car wash, for lack of a better term. And what it is each team brings 1 or 2 star players to a central location. Last year it was New York. This year it was Chicago. And a bunch of, like, all those things you see at the beginning of games where the players are fake skating on the ice, all that gets recorded there. You do a bunch of interviews. And last year, one of the players there was Ryan Getzlaf for Anaheim. And I happened to ask him, you know, we've seen the NBA do this. You know, you're getting a little bit older, which a part he didn't like to be reminded about. And, you know, you play a really physical game. Have you talked with Anaheim about maybe taking some games off? And he goes, yes, we did discuss it this summer. But we're going to see where it goes. And I called the Ducks, and they said, well, he wasn't supposed to tell you that, so we're not giving you any further information. But, so Kyle, I'm wondering, do you think the NHL will ever get to that point where players start taking back-to-backs off?
It's interesting. I think that you see it already with goaltenders. There's very few goalies now that will play in back-to-back games. It's a little bit different. The goalie is playing all 60 minutes of the game, and you know, there's a strong statistical history which shows that a goalie, you can expect a certain drop-off in performance if they play consecutive nights back-to-back. And so that's an easier sell. Plus, in recent times, there's been a lot of evidence of goaltenders reaching a certain threshold, much like pitchers in baseball, of putting themselves at risk or then having success in the playoffs, right? And so it's kind of become a conventional wisdom amongst goaltenders, but it's not yet there amongst forwards and defensemen. And I think as it becomes more pervasive in other sports, whether that's the innings limit in baseball on pitchers, whether that's the way that basketball teams are handling their situations with regards to back-to-back games and resting their star players, I think that it will certainly become more pervasive in hockey. The one element that I would say that would hinder hockey a little bit is that the number of players on our roster who aren't playing or aren't playing as much is not as large as it is in basketball. And in baseball, there's no salary cap. So if we want to sit out a star player who's making a higher percentage of our available cap dollars to bring in somebody else, it just eats away at what's available, right? So there's all those different elements that are in play that I think will affect hockey. But I certainly think, especially as you get later in the year, and especially as your position becomes more secure, I think you'll see teams that are competitive year after year after year. Like San Antonio, I don't know if they were the first one to do it, but it was the first one that sticks out in my mind in basketball. And when you've had 20 years of being a contending team, and you're Greg Popovich, and you can kind of do what you want, it's a little bit easier.
Yeah, nobody's telling you what to do.
But I think it will become something that moves over to hockey in time.
I think one thing, though, that we're learning is it's just really hard on your body and mentally, and we've all done it, whether you take a red eye and you have to go to work the next day, you're just bad. And Vegas has been able to quantify it, the odds makers. And so if you play back-to-back, the second game of the back-to-back, you automatically get docked 2 points on the line. So they're saying, we just know over the course of however many games we've studied that I don't care if you're the Raptors or you're Golden State or you're San Antonio, you're going to start off that next game down 2 in Vegas. So I think that's just an example of, probably objectively why this stuff is, we need to look at it.
This could be a lucrative thing on the Raptors website, Bobby Webster's gambling tips. I like this.
I think there's a lot smarter people than me doing this, but,
On Bobby's point in hockey, if you look at points per 82 games played, and you look at if both teams are fresh, so last night both teams were fresh. We played Arizona, they didn't play the night before, we didn't play the night before. The points per 82 games you can expect in those games are equal. But then when you go into a situation like we'll be in back-to-back situation on the weekend, we'll play in Detroit Friday, then travel back and play at home against Pittsburgh. And at the beginning of the year, our data people produce for us, here's the expected effect of your schedule on your points. And so we start off the season and we say, okay, we're -2, and then if Tampa Bay is in our division is +2, then that's a 4-point gap right off the bat. We're not in that position this year. I'm just using it as a hypothetical.
It's interesting stuff. I know sleep patterns, all this stuff, it gets monitored very closely. Without giving it away, because I know you guys are very careful about these kinds of things, what is the next thing that hockey and basketball teams are looking at? Kyle, I know you mentioned expected goals. I know that's a big one a lot of people are working on right now. What are the next things that people are looking at?
I think it's going to be a number of different metrics that are verifiable and certainly able to be reproduced based off of the player tracking data that comes into the league. Right now, a lot of the available information is either manually tracked or it's digitally tracked or tracked by computers, but then manually confirmed. So there's no real formal tracking programs like they have in the NBA, where we can absolutely 100% produce not produce, but can confirm everything that's happening on the ice, whether it's with the players and their movements or the puck and its movement, and how it transports itself across the ice, whether it's carried past, whatever it may be. And I think once we're able to verify all those with player tracking, it'll open up the ability to confirm a lot more of those metrics like expected goals or various different other metrics that are out there that basketball and I think baseball in particular are much further ahead on.
Bobby, what's the next thing?
So just briefly, so you guys understand what the player tracking is, and so if you take basketball in the 1960s with John Wooden, you'd get a box score, right? It'd have how many points you scored, how many rebounds, and let's say that's 500 data points. And then I don't know how long ago, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, they came up with play-by-play data, which said, okay, and every play, who passed the ball to who, where did the shot get taken from? So now we have more data. What we're using now is what they call player tracking, and so there's cameras in the top of Scotiabank, and they're tracking all 10 players on the court and the ball, I believe, 25 times a second. So now we're talking about, I talked to our analytics guys, over 1 million data points. So now you're able to basically have these really smart cameras who can identify when Kyle Lowry and Serge Ibaka run a pick and roll, so they understands what a pick and roll looks like. And then depending on whether Serge makes the shot, Kyle makes a shot, Kyle passes it to Serge, what the expected value of that shot was. So now you have all these things that help you get a better understanding of what happened in the game as opposed to just what you remember. So in that sense, I would say, we're a little bit ahead of hockey. So to me, the next one for us is injury prevention. And the reason why that's important is with the payroll, I think this year around 140 million, let's say we miss, 10% of the games because of guys being injured, now you're looking at a $14 million loss, right? And so how do we make that basically zero? So how do we ensure that all of our players play as many games as they can, as healthy and as productive as they can? But I always come back to this old saying, I think it was, predicting is hard, especially about the future, right? And so I always think of that when we're thinking of what's next, because it's all about predicting. How are we projecting? How do you project in your own business? How do we project on the court? How do we project what, Kyle's going to do tomorrow? How do we project what Kawhi Leonard is going to do for the next 5 years? But a lot of it, I think, comes down to injury prevention, medical, and how do we keep that as tight as we can.
Okay, a question about your current teams. We saw both of you bring superstar players to Toronto in the offseason. And I think that it's one thing to watch somebody from afar. It's another thing to see them up close. And I think in both Leonard and Tavares' case, we've realized they were even better players than we kind of knew. Just, Bobby, the recruitment of Leonard, how you convinced it all to work out, and just what you've learned about him now that you see him on a day-to-day as opposed to all of the rumors and innuendo you heard before.
It's a high-stakes game this year. No, I think very shortly after we traded for Kawhi, I called this guy, and he was somewhere scouting, and I said, "You're gonna have to give me all your tips on how you guys got Tavares." So no, I think the difference is we traded for Kawhi, and they signed John. And so when you trade for a player, obviously, you have the benefit of the player having to come to you. Whereas when you sign a player, you're competing with the other teams. And we've said it a million times, but we're going into the trade next July 1st when we meet with Kawhi, this entire process with him. It's all about us feeling like we're being authentic to who we are. We're proud of the Toronto Raptors. We're proud of what we built here. We think we have a great coaching staff. We have a great city. We have a great medical staff. We almost want to let those speak for themselves. I think everyone can relate to either being in a position where you were being recruited or you were recruiting somebody else, and you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to, every second of every day, hey, Kawhi, how's it going? What can we do better for you? You want that to be natural. You want to develop a relationship with the person first. You want to listen to what their needs are. You want to listen to any complaints, any, what's going good, what's going bad. And then at the end of the day, we'll see how the season ends up. June going into July, I'm sure we'll have a lot of conversations about what we want that pitch to look like, how much of it focuses on basketball, how much of it focuses on business, how much of it focuses on Toronto, Canada, all the things that we know here. So it's as all-consuming, as comprehensive, as dynamic as you can imagine.
It's going to be a tight squeeze because you're still going to be playing in the middle of June, right?
Exactly. I'll have a couple of days to think about it.
Now, Kyle, when Bobby called you, were you really scouting or were you on a beach somewhere?
No, I was trying to remember exactly where I was, and I don't remember where it exactly. I was driving somewhere, and we talked about just everything. I mean, we're of similar age, and very lucky to have. They're not really jobs. I mean, there's sometimes the pressure gets a little interesting and excited, but I think we're both in fortunate positions. But I learn a lot from them. I really enjoy basketball and watching basketball, and so they've been at it in terms of contending in the NBA for longer than we have. So it's been fun from the time that I've been in Toronto. They've been a good team and building and patiently sticking with their plan and just watching the organization evolve. So I've learned a lot from them. It's been a good opportunity.
So the NBA cap has exceptions. Your cap doesn't. You have, first of all, take us through the recruitment of Tavares.
Sure.
And how you, and first of all, there's a video that they showed Tavares, which I think I've heard is spectacular. And Kyle has said he will never share it unless Tavares gives him permission. So work on Tavares there. But just how you bring him in and how you involve the other players, and then how you have to put the whole circle together when Tavares is done.
We were in an interesting position because we have a very young core of existing players, right? And when they were all draft picks essentially. Frederick Anderson was a trade, but he'd been here for 2 seasons, and then you have Morgan, you have Nas, you have Austin, Mitch, William, and then you've had Jake Gardner, who's been here for a long time. He was by trade, but he's been here longer than anybody. And so you want to make sure that when you're bringing somebody into the organization, it's one thing to, and I think this goes for any business, to go and find a superstar talent, but making sure that they fit within the fabric of the company or of the program was very important to us. And everything that I'd ever heard of John or from John and watching him play, I remember when I was scouting when I was in university still scouting for the Sioux, I would see his team play a lot because he was always playing up a few years and they had a very good team. So you get to be around them and their parents at the rink, and a player builds a reputation, and his was essentially pristine. But you still don't know how it's going to fit into the room, and we wanted to make sure that all of our core of our group was on side with John coming in. And so the first part was, do we want to go after John? Do we think it's the right time for us? And unanimously, the answer was yes. And then it was calls to each of the individual core players on our team to ask them what their thoughts were on it. And then resoundingly, they were, yes, we need to go after him. We'll do whatever we can to help the team. Whatever's necessary, just let us know and we'll do that. And so that was great to hear from me, because I had just really been, I'd been around the team and been with the organization for over 4 years, but it was my first real stretch as the manager of the team. And so that was great for me to hear how excited they were that we were actually going to give it a shot. And so we put everything together and how John would fit in, where our group was at, where it was going, how we were evolving and developing as a program, how we wanted to build it out, what we were really about as an organization. And the players were a huge part of that. I mean, they were involved in it every step of the way. And I think, in the end, people can talk about whatever they want, but he came to Toronto because of the players that were here. And for really, I don't think any other reason. The organization, I think, is sound. We're continuing to try to improve, but the ability to play with those players for a long stretch was the key.
All right. Let's take some questions. There's a hand up over here. I think there's a mic coming around. Right behind. I think I met you earlier. Your name's Patrick, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
good memory. This is for Kyle. The Athletic recently came out with a list of the top 40 business people under 40. So congratulations for not only making that list, but topping the list. And I can't resist mentioning that my nephew, Dustin Walsh, of the Vegas Golden Knights, also made that list. But there's a lot of hockey people over 40 that may be set in their own old school ways, who may not fully embrace the benefits of data analytics. Is it important to you that they do, and how do you bring them around?
That's a good question. Congratulations on your nephew. That's great. I would say that I think I've been branded as an analytics person, but I think one of the major advantages to the question that you have is that when I grew up in scouting and player development, and then when going back to Sault Ste. Marie as the GM when I was 25, it's a team, it's a small market, it's a smaller market relative to the league. The revenues relative to the rest of the teams in that league are small, and the expenses are far greater than most teams in the league. So we didn't have the resources that were really going to be necessary to compete on a massive scouting staff or expensive, innovative ventures. And so we began to figure out, the way I looked at it is we couldn't be wrong as much as others because we didn't have the resources to make up for our mistakes by just spending more and by signing more players and giving them lucrative, in that league, their education packages. And we were very constrained what we could do. So we turned, I'd always been interested in it and invested my time in learning more about it on the baseball side, and then started reading more about it in hockey. And so that's where we started to incorporate data into our decision making there to arm us and better inform us in every decision that we made to try to reduce our errors. And I think having grown up in scouting and player development and then incorporating the data side of it much later and not coming in purely as a data person has been the biggest help that I have in terms of trying to educate or work with people who are anti-use of analytics in our sport. Whether we've worked with them or they work for other teams or they're media people who are very negative about it. I think that I'm just very fortunate that was my my background, and really nothing other than luck in that regard has helped to explain this is what I was before, and just scouting and player development, and this is how data helped us to turn our program around, and that seems to help most.
I can't believe you'd say the media would be negative about something. By the way, Patrick, Kyle wishes your nephew all the best, except in this year's Stanley Cup final, right? There you go. Other questions? There's a hand right down here. Please let us know your name.
Hi, I'm Susie Hendry.
Hi, Susie.
I have a question. Obviously, the collection of data brings great benefits to the team and to the players, but in a world where so much data can be collected 24 hours a day, at what point do the teams and coaches and the players say enough is enough?
I definitely think it's time of year, right? So during the summer, during the off season, it's a lot of time for us to dig deep and have, go down endless rabbit holes and talk about, how do we want to evaluate the team. But I think a good example is like during the game. So we have analytics people on our coaching staff, but they just can't sit back there and tell Nick, don't pass here, that kind of stuff. So I think it's, you have to set those parameters in advance of the season, so we kind of agree on what are the 4 or 5 parameters we're going to look at over the course of the year, so that we don't, end up going down too many, wild goose chases as far as looking at everything. So you do have to kind of agree within your group of what are the things that we're gonna focus on.
One of the things, just quickly, is that most players say that younger players are much more receptive to it than older players are. Is that generally true?
I don't know. I'd say Kyle Lowry's probably our most receptive.
Oh, okay.
And so it's, I think it's just what the mindset is. I think even back to what Kyle was saying is, I tell some of our coaches that are more analytically inclined, I say, go coach youth basketball, go coach high school. Like, we need to teach those kids that, because otherwise, if the same people are coaching the younger kids, then ultimately then they'll just come up, lacking that kind of education.
Okay. In the back. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Tim Culleton.
Tim?
It's a question really for both of you. You're successful executives and you happen to be young. What advice would you have for other young people that are looking for an executive role or a role with a professional team as a career?
That's a question I probably get more than any other question. And my advice is, if you really want to work in sports. Is your question about if it's sports related or just in general?
Sports related.
Sure. So when it pertains to sports, I would say that there's so much opportunity from a very young age to work, as long as you're not set on working at the very highest level at the beginning. So I grew up in Sault Ste. Marie. There's really the only show in town is the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds, and I was very fortunate. When I was 11 years old, I was still playing hockey, and I got to start working as the water boy for the team. And then I got injured playing hockey, and the role grew from being the water boy on game days to working in the office, in the front office, and then doing scouting, and it just continued to evolve. But when I look back on the journey, if I wouldn't have really loved doing that when I was 11 years old and volunteering every day, and then when I was scouting for the team, I got very lucky when I was going to university after working in the front office for 3 years. In high school, our scout in that area just quit late in the summer, and they offered me the job when I was 17, and the pay was nothing, but I just thought it was a great opportunity. And my grandfather had a great way of looking at it. There was other people in my family who said, you don't want to do that job, it's going to cost you money, because you're going to have to drive around and you're not getting paid anything. And he said, you look at it as an investment in yourself. And that's how I looked at the investment of time, even though it was getting no money, or you were actually losing money doing it. But if you hadn't done that and taken those opportunities at a lower level where there's a lot more responsibility to be had, then you'd never advance your way through and be afforded the mentorship that I was all the way through from the time I was 11 to Lou Lamoriello and so on and so forth. So that would be my take.
That's great advice. Is the pay any better now?
A little bit.
Okay. Bobby?
I think the perspective I've kind of thought about over the years, it's a question we always get, is if you grow up in sports, you grow up whenever and you're high achieving and you're one of the leaders of your high school team, your college team, and then you enter the workforce, and now it's like, okay, you're down here, right? And it's an interesting dynamic of having a ton of leadership responsibilities early in life, and then you go through this point after university or college where now you're at the bottom and you're carrying towels and getting drinks for people. And on that kind of next ascent, I think it's important to remember those leadership qualities that you had growing up and apply those in your current daily life, in your work, in a way that's relevant to your position. And then as you continue to move up, now I'm able to draw on all of those things that I had growing up, and now you're able to utilize them more. But don't forget them to use them, I guess, in that little ascent that you have.
If there's one last thing that I would add, just as the wizened elder of this panel, I have learned, Tim, and I would tell this to any young person that any of you in this room are giving advice to, is that the right people are always watching. And I always tell that to young people now. They think, how do I get noticed? I tell them, you have an advantage that I didn't have when I started, and that is the world of social media. And social media can be a bad thing, but it can also be a very good thing. You can create a voice where people of my generation could not create a voice. We had to write for our student papers or volunteer somewhere, and then we hoped to get hired. Now there are people out there who have created their own ability to be heard without being hired in the old traditional way. But I always tell them that the right people are always watching. You are always being judged, good or bad. So I always say, carry yourself as if you're always being judged. It's not easy. We all make mistakes. We all have slip-ups. But I think in general, that advice that I received when I was younger and I have given when I've been younger to other people who've been younger, I've been told that that's good advice that they get. Because as you guys all know, a lot of you probably hear higher, you're always watching the people that you're looking out for. Kent, I think we're good. So thanks very much, everybody, for your questions and your time. Just hang on.
Thanks, guys. I'm pleased to invite Mike Henry, Executive Vice President and Chief Data Officer from Scotiabank, to the podium to thank today's speakers.
Elliotte, don't worry, there's now a couple more guys that aren't in their 30s on stage with you. It is a privilege to be here on behalf of Scotiabank to say thank you to our speakers. Both MLSE and Rogers are key partners of the bank. And Bobby and Kyle, we are excited to hear about the new ways that data is helping to revolutionize sport. And Scotiabank is thrilled to be a partner of both of your teams, not just to use data to help win games, but frankly also to use it to help create better fan experiences for all the people that enjoy watching our games. Beyond Bobby's gambling tips, I wanted to just do a quick bridge to the world of business here, and I think both of you gentlemen talked a little bit about leveraging data starts with early education, starts with culture change to get it embedded in the organizations. Bobby, I was struck by your comment about the ongoing benchmarking of organizational health when you were talking about Kauai, and Kyle using data to focus attention on really specific aspects or processes of the game. I thought those were key insights for me personally. The fact that we're here today means that we're interested not just in the subject, but I think also keenly interested in the success of your teams. So we all wish you very well, and please join me in thanking Elliotte, Bobby, and Kyle for their time today.
Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much. That was great.
Thank you.
That was great. Great job. So we've come to the conclusion of our program. I want to call everyone's attention. We have some great events coming up. For those of you who are interested in sports, we have the Vice President of FIFA coming on the 30th of the month to talk about the World Cup, what it's bringing to the region, and that's going to be a fantastic event. We also have Barack Obama's speechwriter, Sarita Perry, on the 20th of January, and many other events through the season. So thank you very much for coming today. I want to thank Rogers and our lead sponsor, Scotiabank, again for all the work that they put in the sponsorship. Thank you very much, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.